Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is October 23rd today, Wednesday, and I'm sitting down to talk with my friend Kat about her podcast, which is all about creative introversion. We're going to talk about creativity and introversion, and we're also going to talk about astrology. So creativity, introversion, and astrology all together at once. It should be pretty cool. Kat's also, I met Kat through her YouTube channel and through her podcast. Actually, I was a listener. And then we started chatting about the topics of her podcast. And then she ended up being interested in astrology and comes to take my course in astrology eventually. So we've developed a blossoming friendship over the past couple of years. And I'm really happy to have you here today to hang out and talk a bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Kat, right now you are in, I believe you are in, let's see, what?
Bali.
Bali, right. And
Yeah,
that means that means as we're speaking, it's like, what time is it your time?
It's 3 a.m. and I mean I'm an early riser, but this is like pushing it for me. But getting used to dealing with people in the rest of the world because that's what
Right,
traveling
totally.
does.
And where are you, I mean, where are you from? You're not from Bali, you're from...
Yeah, London, I guess. My parents wouldn't like that. They're like, "You're Irish, Kat." They're Irish parents. But yeah, London.
Right. And I found you on your podcast, which is also, you can find it on YouTube as well. I think probably almost 2 years ago, it feels like now. I don't remember exactly, but it was a while ago. And yeah, I wanted to share with other people what you're doing because I really like your work. So yeah, tell us about your podcast so that people know a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so it came into being because I had just gone freelance. I'd quit my job at this design marketing agency, and that was partly because I couldn't stand the open plan office space. So other introverts might relate to that. But freelancing wasn't that easy either. I thought that just having a pretty website would get me clients. And there were things like networking that I was trying to make myself do. And a lot of other kind of like marketing tactics that just weren't really sitting well with me. And I was moaning to a friend about it, and they were like, "It's because you're an introvert." I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not shy. I don't hate people. It's not that." And then he explained what it actually is. Told me to check out Susan Cain's work. So you might have seen her TED talk. She's got a book as well. And I kind of realized that I wasn't the only creative person person who's trying to make a living doing creative work. And I just kind of mean, for me, it was illustration and design at the time. Who was also an introvert. You know, I'd go to these networking events and I knew some other illustrators and like animators, and everyone hated the actual marketing side of things. No one wanted to be around like lots of people. And I kind of thought, well, I need to start talking about this. I started blogging about it at first. I started like a Facebook group. I mean, those are the first things you do, right? To talk about them. And then pretty soon I realized that, yeah, this is definitely a thing. And because I was listening to a lot of podcasts myself, I thought I have to start podcasts because it seems to be a better way to connect with people than just writing. At least for me, that was the case. And yeah, that's kind of, I've been doing that ever like maybe 3 years now, 4 years.
So
I have an online community and all that. Yeah.
So tell people a little bit, like, describe some of the episodes that you've done, like different things that you've covered, because it's really unique, the different things that you cover. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mixture. I'd say that it mostly falls into more like traditional marketing things, like online marketing, really, not so much digital marketing, but done in a way that might suit an introvert. So I'm not saying like go out there and like, you know, shove business cards at everyone you meet. You know, I talk about like email, like writing a good email, because that suits a lot of introverts a lot more. But then there's also the mindset stuff. So a lot of like psychology thrown in there, personality type stuff. So I'm really into Myers-Briggs, and actually that's kind of how I got into astrology, was because, yeah, I mean, maybe we'll talk about that in a bit, but it was partly through research for the podcast. So yeah, there's a big range, and I interview guests about it as well.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because one of the reasons that I thought this would make for an interesting conversation is that as an astrologer who teaches a lot of astrologers, right, who trains people who are becoming astrologers, um, there's always this question that astrologers have, which is how do I market myself, or how do I get myself out there? And I think one of the things that makes it difficult for astrologers, one of the reasons I connected with your show to the point where you've been something of a personal inspiration for me in terms of helping me do some really important shifting of how I've presented my own work, um, is that a lot of astrologers are introverts. Even though we're out, like I'm on YouTube all the time. I've for before that I wrote for like a long time, and one of the weird things that happened to me that really shifted my perspective was I actually was listening to one of your podcasts at some point, and it was right around the time that that major total solar eclipse happened in the United States. I don't know if you guys got it in London or not, but it was in like late Leo. It was in August of 2017, and it was right before I launched my YouTube channel, and I think it was December or January of like 2018, 2017 into 2018. And I was having sort of a crisis because when I'm teaching with a smaller group, like 20, 30 people, like I'm fine. No big deal. And, you know, when I was in college, I used to occasionally play a coffee shop with my guitar, you know, and writing blogs online. I wrote a book, right? So I've given talks at, like, I've done a reading before at bookstores and things like that. Never big audiences. And then I realized that, you know, my ability to market myself on Facebook was really declining because of things that were happening with Facebook. And at that point, I really had to sit down and I was like, YouTube is a really great place, and podcasting, but YouTube in particular, like, is a good place. And what a lot of people would imagine that I would be like this extroverted person because I teach and write and share a lot, but actually, like, I need really deep long periods to recover. I don't do well around big groups. It's not that I don't like people, it's not that I'm some kind of like, there's a lot of misconceptions about what introverts were that you helped me understand. There's also a lot of misconceptions about how we should try to go about being creative and get our name and our work out there that are not always tailored for introverts. And so you just helped shift my thinking, and were really important part of how I gained some confidence in the early stages of my push to go out and make YouTube stuff. And then the other thing that you really helped me with and helping me understand um, introversion was also just like that, you know, some of the features of who we are as introverts, let's say, not everyone listening to this is an introvert, obviously, but if you are, if you know one, that sometimes your biggest enemy is really subtly trying to be someone that you aren't in terms of how you market and present yourself to others. And I think sometimes also in astrology, we think that marketing is like a dirty word. And I've been reframing it through your work with me, because Kat's been working with me one-on-one for a while now. I've also been reframing it in terms of like, um, to shift the presentation in line with my values and in who I am does not mean that I'm going in violation of my values. Because, like, in the beginning, for example, my YouTube was really low production. Not that it's really high production now or anything, but it was comparatively, there were some little tweaks that I've done over time. I was almost anti any kind of production value whatsoever, like making covers for my YouTube pieces, which you've been helping me with. I was like anti a lot of those kinds of things because I was just like, well, I'm not that kind of, like, look at me, extroverted, like I'm so
It's
great.
almost
Like,
like you're trying too hard, you know, and you don't, like, I think a lot of creatives as well don't want to come across like they're trying too hard.
yes, exactly, exactly. So you kind of had to overcome that too, which was kind of how the podcast started.
Yeah, and like you said, trying to be something we're not, I think that's a lot of the problem. And I hadn't realized that that was the problem until I realized what I was. And that's kind of, again, how I really found all of the kind of self knowledge stuff really interesting. Because then I could be like, well, if that feels good, I'll do that. If that doesn't feel good, I won't do that. And, you know, people connect with people. So the more of yourself you're putting into your work, and that's kind of what I like to try to encourage my audience is, you know, if you don't have an about page, like, I won't be as interested in your art. because I want to connect with the person. So yeah, and I think that's something that you do naturally very well on your channel. So that's pretty good.
I think it's probably because I grew up in the church where my father was a minister, and one of the ways in which he spoke his sermon every Sunday was through anecdote. Like, he was a really good anecdotal storyteller, and I ended up studying storytelling in my MFA in grad school. And it's funny how, like, I wrote a book that a lot of people read, but I wrote that book like in living by myself in seclusion for like years. And so it's weird sometimes. I feel like a lot of creative people are introverted in Hollywood and in film and in music, and you don't think about it necessarily. You have this image of them maybe loving fame or loving the spotlight or something like that. But for a lot of creative people, that part of being creative and sharing your work is actually really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's almost like, I mean, I've heard people talk about creativity in that it's something that you have to do. So maybe those people in Hollywood, like you said, they're not doing it for the fame or to go to these parties. Maybe some of them are, but some of them just have to do that work. Same with a lot of, yeah, just a lot of people doing creative work. They feel pulled to do the work, and the the other stuff, and like having to survive. So having to make money from that work, that creates a bunch of problems. And I don't think they have to be problems, but people perceive them as that.
So on that track, I'm hoping that this conversation will excite people to check out your work, especially people who are trying to figure out how to represent themselves and their work creatively in the world, while also maybe being more of an introvert. But I also want to talk about two other things. One is I want to get your definition of an introvert. I want people to hear a little bit about you speaking about what introversion may actually look like and some of the stereotypes. And then I want to move into talking about astrology and how that came into your life. But let's maybe first start with just like how do we misunderstand introverts, and what are introverts?
Yeah, so what really annoys me is that if you Google the word introvert, you'll still see something like somebody who's shy and reticent. And I think those are different traits. Uh, for me, shyness is something that, like, I definitely was a very shy kid, but something I worked on. Whereas introversion, at least in the way that I'm defining it, and a lot of people like Susan Cain defines it, it's not really something that you should work, like you need to work on, or can even. So for me, I describe it to people as introverts get their energy from spending time alone, and they process information more slowly and deeply, which is why, like, it took a long time for me to practice like just speaking off the cuff. I'm much more comfortable writing, and much clearer when I'm writing. So those traits, they don't really have much to do with like shyness, social anxiety, also high sensitivity, which is like another thing that the internet loves to talk about. The other thing that I just find really interesting is that my definition comes a lot more from the Myers-Briggs Jung kind of world, but that's quite different from what a lot of like actual psychologists and today kind of talk about when they talk about introversion. Because the Big Five model, which is like another personality type profiling tool, which is more commonly used and approved of, maybe, that definition of introversion is really different. And I actually come out as an extrovert on that. I can't even say it. Like, I come out as an extrovert identity crisis when I take that test. And and yeah, I encourage introverts to look at that as well, taking the Myers-Briggs. Maybe also take the Big Five, or the what else is it called? The five-factor model, because especially when it comes to creativity, because that is also going to show you kind of like maybe a marker maybe for creativity as well, which they call openness. So yeah, a lot of people in my audience are probably more like open, conscientious, neurotic, agreeable extroverts. I mean, that's like on that model. And so this is the problem. Definitions are, they're just labels, really.
Yeah, right. I resonate with that idea of introversion being about getting your energy from being alone and processing things slowly and deeply. I've always had the ability to be really good in front of people, but it drains me. It's like
Mhm.
deeply draining and exhausting. Um, and my best creative work, whether it's like my YouTube work every day, what people don't know often about my creative work on YouTube, which I usually share this in my annual Kickstarter. I put it in the video to let people know kind of what goes into the work that I do when I'm asking people to support me in the year ahead. And one of the things that I try to present for people is like my morning is like 3 hours of concentrated alone time before I sit down to craft whatever video I'm going to make for the day or whatever I'm writing for the day. It's like, and I have to have that. And I've had to fight for it, obviously, now that I'm a father of two. And my schedule is a lot less sort of regimented than it used to be with that alone time that I needed to factor into the creative output. So my schedule's a little bit more all over the place now with two kids, especially in the last year. But at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, I have usually a couple of hours after the kids are in bed and before they're up in the morning where I get up and like have to have that space. Otherwise, seeing clients, giving classes, and making videos or content, the written content is actually the easiest for me. Um, it drains me. It will drain me. So that definition makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up the morning routine thing, because that's something I love to talk about on the podcast as well, and really encourage introverts, even if they aren't people who like to get up super early, just to find some space in the day where they can be alone. And I'm not going to tell people what they have to do in that time, but it's really helpful. And when I was working at an um, I ended up just taking like a really long commute just to kind of have that really focused time, like on one single bus. I mean, I found ways to get that alone time.
Yeah, totally. Um, and I mean, when I was a kid, I remember for me, the problem was thinking that extroversion was what made you happy, that being active, being popular, being people laughing at your jokes, this kind of performance thing. And as I grew older, my family moved when I was in high school, and we moved, and then I didn't have that group any longer. And it was like the first time that I started giving myself permission to actually be alone more. And what I found was that like my mom was like worried about me, like you're used to be so social. And she'd say this now too, she realized that um there was an introverted, very creative side of me that was coming out, where it appeared like something was dying socially. There was something blossoming on a more internal level, I guess you could say. Um, yeah, and I feel like in this day and age too, if you're introverted, people suspect you. What are they doing? What are they? Like in the United States anyway, with the gun violence epidemic and especially all these public mass shootings, the profile is always some kind of shy, introverted loner. You know what I mean? And so it's like it's very easy for people to lump into the category of like mental health problems, people who enjoy being alone or who need really deep, slow, quiet alone time.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I'm mentioning her again, but Susan Cain does talk a lot about that, especially in the States. I feel like it's maybe more acceptable to be quiet in the UK and like Europe. Um, but that was something. I mean, even I like struggled with that. Being told you're shy or quiet when I was a kid, I already knew that that wasn't like a compliment. People weren't
Right.
saying that to be nice. They were like, "You've got a problem. You need to fix it."
Well, so on that note, I mean, um, it's interesting that in those spaces where people say you're shy, there's something wrong with you, that space, I mean, on one level, it's unfortunate that that space is accompanied by this kind of judgment. But on the other hand, I remember, and you tell me what you think of this, that the judgment that I felt from other people that I was kind of shy, introverted, artistic, etc., that was a kind of fuel for me creatively as well. It was, I wouldn't say it in sports, they say you carry a chip on your shoulder that makes you perform better. I wouldn't say it's like that, but I would say that my sense of, being an outsider and of knowing that I didn't fit in was an integral part of finding what I found. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, I don't know if introverts can be, if you can separate introversion from some of the social stigma around it fully in any place, because for thousands of years, our melancholics have been like our great artists, right? So, and melancholia, being a melancholic, as Ficino said, like back in the Renaissance, that's a position that the great creative energy, but also sometimes this feeling of a rain cloud that's in you as well. And I think people who suffer through that creatively end up developing intimacy in that space. But I don't know if it's ever going to be the same for people who don't really struggle with that as a part of creative life.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to see that if like this internet embracing of version, which I kind of would class myself as a part of, if that can change things. But I don't think it can, because then like who would the outsider be? What is the outsider going to be? The extrovert? Like how would that work?
Right.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, and I kind of think the important thing is that it's how people perceive that label.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like I said, that's kind of what it is, and you could either use that to give yourself like that permission to create, and that's wonderful. But you can also use it as an excuse to like be a recluse and not really not a very nice person. So
one of the things that I think can help children understand these different personality types, if we want to call them that, is in helping them understand, like one show that my daughter watches that I've noticed is really good at educating kids about temperaments, is Winnie the Pooh, right? You've got Piglet, who is the classic phlegmatic, like a watery, real sensitive, nervous type, real sweet. You've got Rabbit, who's the typical, what am I thinking of?
Choleric.
He's the choleric, right? He's the choleric. He's got the fire. He's really in charge and willful. And then there's Tigger, who is the sanguine, and he's like bouncy and fun and outgoing and kind of lusty. He's like always got something he wants to do. And then there's Eeyore, who's the melancholic, who's the kind of gloomy one. Maybe they could draw out some of the benefits of melancholic and Eeyore a little bit more, but they're all part of the team. You know what I mean? Like they're all part of this little.
Eeyore was my favorite.
Yeah, totally. But it's like they're all part of the same thing in Sesame Street. Sesame Street was good at that too, where each character is beloved, even though they all have very different moods. And in Bhakti Yoga, one of the things that is emphasized, that the science is really in understanding how every different kind of, that the science of Bhakti Yoga is in understanding how every different kind of emotion can be understood as, eternal, divine, transcendental, like how is jealousy spiritual, how is rage, or the difficult ones too, as well as all of the other ones, like the difference between parental affection and the affection of friends, or the all of the different moods of human connection and so forth are framed in terms of spiritual life. Like how do you dovetail those things into spiritual life? But I think one of the things about creative introversion, and you tell me if you agree with this or not, is that creative introverts, it takes you a while to process the experiences that you're having. And really, I think there's a desire for inclusion. It's like, how can I constantly feel like I need time alone because I need to incorporate things, kind of bring them in and let them have a place in me. And that takes time. You can't rush that.
For sure. And going back to I kind of mentioned earlier that I much prefer to express myself in writing, but journaling has really helped me to kind of process all of those things. And again, it's maybe not going to be what every introvert chooses to process things, but making art. I mean, maybe that's the result of so much great art and music and everything else.
Right. So it's about trying to help the place of introversion to be seen, understood, maybe respected in a healthier way. May never take away some of the things that introversion comes along with, but just raising awareness about what it is, and also I think the practical value of your channel. I mean, it is practical, but in terms of like people who are out there seeking practical help for their business as a creative person, your work has also been really awesome. So that, I think that's another really great piece, a great reason to tune into what you're doing. There are two things I wanted to ask you follow-ups on. Tell us who Susan Cain is. What is her book? Where can we find it? That was one question I wanted to make sure we hit up for everyone.
Yeah, so just Google Susan Cain. You'll find her TED Talk really massively popular on YouTube, I guess. And her book is called Quiet. And I think her site is quietrev.com.
Very cool. Okay, so second question was, you mentioned a few different personality tests that people could take that might have slightly different results, but that you could take. What are those called again, and where could people find them?
Yeah, so Myers-Briggs, I think, there's like a paid test you can take, but I think 16personalities.com. A lot of people love that because it's really like visually appealing. It's designed very well. And that will give you your like 4-letter Myers-Briggs code.
It's called
And
16personalities.com.
yes, like the number 16
Okay.
and then personalities.com, I think. And the other one is the Big Five. And I don't think there's like one like definitive place to take this, but just Google Big Five test or the 5-factor model, and you'll find it there as well.
5-factor model or Big Five test. Okay, cool. So those are a few personality tests you can take. And then where can people find your work before we start talking about astrology now? Because we're going to bridge this into astrology a bit next. But before that, I just want to make sure that people know, okay, where do I go check out your Creative Introvert podcast?
Sure. Yeah. So everything's at thecreativeintrovert.com. And I'm on the social medias at Creative Intro.
So thecreativeintrovert.com, and then you're on social media at the Creative Introvert. We'll try to put those in the description, the links, so that everyone can have them in the description box for this video. So at some point you got interested in astrology, and then you ended up coming and taking my program. So I'm also going to borrow you to help promote my program and talk a little bit about astrology and how well, first of all, let's just start with, how did you get interested in astrology?
Yeah, so I was like a skeptic up until like maybe 2 years ago, if that. Because I was doing this series for the podcast, which I looked at all of these different personality type tests. And one of the things I looked at was the Enneagram. And I remember going to the library, finding a book on the Enneagram, and it had tried to correlate Enneagram types with astrology. And I remember being like really appalled, like, oh, they just ruined a good thing, and they brought in all of this nonsense astrology stuff. And then I kind of got over myself, and I thought, well, maybe there's something to this, if this is another way that I can understand my. And I had always identified quite strongly with the Aries archetype, Aries sun, and so I was like, well, there's something there, and there's maybe something that I can learn, and maybe do a podcast episode about it. And I remember talking about this to a skeptical friend, like she's like an official skeptic, like with a capital S. And she was kind of saying, well, the reason astrology works is the same reason your beloved Myers-Briggs works, and all of these personality type tests. Like none of them are scientific. They're all based on like Barnum statements and cognitive biases. And, she very well, like, and very compassionately, she wasn't being mean about it, but told me why, in her opinion, these things appear to work. And I was like, that hasn't put me off. That just means all of these things are useful. They don't have to be scientific. Maybe there's something to astrology too. So after that, I started just researching what I could. I learned that there was more to astrology than like your star sign. And I found the astrology podcast and was really, really impressed, because I guess I had this image of astrologers in my head, which were all like Mystic Meg. I don't know if she's a thing. I don't think she's a thing in the US, but any people from the UK will get that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, just like the classic fortune teller, with a maybe like with a crystal ball. I'm not sure what that has to do with astrology, but that was the image. Uh, and at this time, I was still thinking that astrology is a useful psychological tool. Um, I'd like dismissed any possibility about prediction. And then I listened to the episode that you did. Do you remember that?
The episode on prediction, like me, I was defending prediction with Chris on the astrology podcast.
Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still remember where I was. Like, now I need to completely change what I thought astrology was. This guy has just described how he found a bull. And he doesn't seem to be lying. Like, I believe that. And it just meant that I had to completely shift what I had limited astrology to. And yeah, and I found your YouTube channel and kind of learned a lot more from there.
Yeah. But you said you remembered where you were when you heard it, and that part cut out because your audio was flipping in and out. Where were you? I'm just curious.
Oh, I was on the bus, but it just, it was one of those things where I was like, when I got off the bus, I was like completely changed.
Right. It was a magical bus ride. Yeah, that's that episode for a lot of people actually. I've heard that feedback, where it was something, it was just a special it was a special talk. And I was at a point where I was getting really fed up, frankly, with people saying, yes, exactly what your friend said, no offense to her, but yeah, it's just a useful, antiquated form of psychology from the old world, and now we can use it alongside of other kinds of personality profiling devices, and like it's meaningful and artistic and fun. And I was like, I had been drinking ayahuasca, plant medicine, for like a decade, and practicing yoga, and really coming to an understanding of reality and consciousness it was just smashing everything that secular materialism and secular rationalism had told me, that what was real. I mean, I was in the Amazon drinking a potion and having conversations with my dead grandmother. I mean, and I'm not talking about some kind of, I'm not a psychic. I'm just a normal dude who drinks a potion and has a full on conversation with grandma. I in my first couple of ceremonies, I was having conversations with Jesus. Like, I mean, it was really, and these are not like unique to me. Like, these are experiences that many, many, many people have when they go through these ceremonies. And so it had just sort of smashed the door open and been like, there's more out there than you think there is, because these were not, like a dream where it's like, oh, well, that was a dream. This was very vivid and very sober, in a sense, experiences of other worlds, other dimensions of my mind, other dimensions of consciousness. You're having, many people during the ceremonies are having conversations with spirits, like, constantly. And it's real. I mean, it's legit. You can go do it yourself if you don't believe it. So those kinds of experiences for me, because I consider myself something of a skeptic too. Like, I was thinking about law or science at one point. I studied philosophy. I always had, because I was raised a preacher's kid, excuse me, I just had this kind of fixation with being like, okay, well, what's ultimately real? What's true? Why am I here? Those questions just came with me. But the interesting thing that happens in astrology is you cross this threshold where once you start getting into it, once you really start getting into it, you realize that the reality that astrology is describing is fundamentally different from the reality that science is describing, even though in many ways science describes the same reality that astrology describes. The only difference is that science doesn't have access to describe a lot of the reality that astrology describes, and you can test it for yourself. So it's, for example, like the story I told in that podcast episode, just so everyone has context, was one of the first major predictions that ever really blew my socks off, which there had been many already, like there's going to be a divorce, or there's going to be a pregnancy, or there's going to be a big influx, you're going to get promoted. Like, that stuff was pretty common. But I would consider those predictions to be educated guessing based on knowledge of the patterns of the planets, the symbolism of the planets, and the timing of the transits of the planets. When I started getting to horary astrology, which is very predictive, it would be questions like, where is my missing bull? A farmer asking about their missing bull. I mean, that was actually kind of a rare question, but people would ask questions like, where's my missing cell phone or my wallet, or very specific questions like, my animal is gone, will it come back? Sometimes very predictive. Like in the case of the bull, I had used the horary technique to describe where the bull was, what its condition was very specifically, that it had gotten hurt in a very specific kind of way, and what direction it was in and stuff like that. So, you know, science has to be able at some point, in my opinion, to account for the fact that astrology has the power to do this. So if it's not, I mean, I don't sit and go like the planets are causing everything to happen, but there is such a thing as the study of omens and signs. And there's a long history of prophecy, prediction, and divination related to these intricate, you can't call them unreasonable. It's like there's geometry, there's math that goes into the construction of these languages that are very beautiful. And so at some point, science has to at least try to account for how it is that the languages like this have the power to do what they do, not just describing psychology, but making really concrete, amazing predictions, like pretty regularly. Like I'll give you one more example. So I very recently in my practice, I'll give you three actually. So one case, I predicted the outcome of a court case very specifically for a woman who was wondering, what was going to happen on several different issues within a custody proceeding. Just not like I get everything all the time, but like got that one really, and that was just recently. Told someone exactly where to look for a missing ring. There it was. And let's see, another one was not long ago, I predicted a pregnancy for a woman specific to the month. These things happen regularly for astrologers just as much as we're sitting around describing our personalities through a creative language. Anyway, I always have to go off on a slight rant when the idea of astrology as merely self-help or merely psychological comes up, and be like, yeah, but there's also this whole other dimension to it which defies, the scientific paradigm. So what do you do with that? But I think the other thing, frankly, that astrology for many people on the level of psychology is like kind of like a gateway drug. It's like, this is my introduction. It feels interesting. And then all of a sudden you're in it and you're like, wow, there's way more to it. That sounds like what happened with you.
Yeah, and I would kind of tell people, I mean, even talking to my friend, the more I talk about it to her, the more she's like open to it. I mean, I say that cautiously, but that's the thing. The more I looked into it, the crazier it got, and the more undeniable. The thing is that most skeptical people, most like scientists, they aren't doing that. They aren't looking that hard. They don't want to.
No. And because they've already come to an explanation in their head about it. There are beliefs that shape the way that science looks at religion, altered states of consciousness, divination, and all sorts of other phenomenon, even interesting phenomenon like precognition. Science comes to its conclusions about these things far before they've ever actually done any legitimate thought, given any legitimate thought, and often prior to having the ultimate test really in astrology is experience. It's because in astrology that you have to take a paradigm, in my opinion, based on what its claims are. Like the astrology, the paradigm of astrology says the sky speaks in signs and omens. These are symbols that can be read and used in order to get a piece of advice, in order to understand who you are, in order to predict something concrete or to warn of something, or it has a lot of different functions. So you have to understand what astrology claims to be. And then you have to understand that the other thing is that astrologers have always said that the first and most basic definition of astrology is oracular and divinatory, which means that when you approach it, if you approach it as though you're approaching a dry, like nature, like let's cut it up and see how it works mechanistically, it doesn't respond. That would be like you thinking that if you had the list of correct things to say to a guy or a girl you want to date, that your tone of voice won't have anything to do with it, right? In astrology, we say that your intention and the personal reason for going to have this experience matters as to whether or not the sky will respond. And unless scientifically minded people take that part of it seriously, as well as the claims of what the multifaceted uses of astrology, and try to look at it in terms of its own claims within its own paradigm, they'll be committing the most basic scientific flaw, which is to not approach objectively. You know what I mean? And then they're really just bringing their beliefs into it.
Yeah, and expecting astrology to kind of conform to the scientific method. I mean, and I'm all for the scientific method until it doesn't work for something, and you have to, like, I don't know, just open it up to this other thing that sits outside of science. It
And
seems to sit outside of science. I don't
and
know.
the thing that's really ultimately very difficult is that science doesn't understand the things that are most primary to our experience. Like, for example, choice, intimacy, love. These are not things that can be explained really in the language of science. Most of all, why, like, the most funny thing is that science really can't predict what we will do, how we will act, how we will think, how we will respond, beyond maybe some genetic predispositions. Can't it can't compensate for or really get into that realm. Um, which I wonder, in a broader sense, it's very interesting that I would imagine that interior space of our experience that is ineffable, that's really indescribable. I wonder if, like Ficino in the Renaissance said that the star of astrology in many ways was Saturn, because it was people who practice astrology are often melancholic. You have to be to stare up at the sky and wonder about the larger laws of the universe and cosmos and human karma and so forth. You have to kind of have a bit of a detached distance as an observer of human life, but that can also come with a little bit of the pain, the deeper emotional need for alone time, all of this stuff. So I can't help but think that you to really approach astrology is, in many ways, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because I think to approach astrology in some ways, you have to take in the view of an introvert. You have to take in a bit of Saturn or the melancholic. Not that everyone has to, there are extroverts who do astrology too, but I'm just saying that. And I don't know if science is an introvert. I feel like
Mm.
science is very extroverted in terms of just looking at the external world and the patterns of the external world and how they work, and understanding them and manipulating them or whatever. But that interior space that I was just mentioning, that's the space of astrology. Maybe it's a space of introversion. Maybe science has sometimes a problem with being too extroverted.
Yeah, I love that. And it just made me think that a lot of the experience I've had of astrology, at least since kind of having that paradigm shift, is it's not just like I'm having these realizations at the time when I'm studying it. It often happens afterwards, and it kind of like, it has to, I don't know, percolate, and I have to be with it. I have to let it be inside, and I don't know, go inward to find the gold in astrology. So yeah, there's definitely introversion, or at least introspection, seems to help.
Introspection might be a word that's really unifying for people out there who don't consider themselves extrovert or introverts, that they don't need long periods of alone time or creative space. But yeah, I think introspection you have to have if you're going to do astrology, for sure. So you're in my current program. Are you in the Saturday? You're in the Saturday program, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just
Yeah.
finishing up after a year. I would love for, is that right?
No, I'm 6 months in.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're on the Sundays then. Okay, right. So you're on the Sunday
Sorry,
program.
yeah.
You're on the Sunday program, and 6 months in, um, what do you like about the program? Help me promote it for everyone out there who's listening and wants to know more about it. What do you like about it? What's been helpful about it? Yeah, maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was somebody who thought that they could just learn astrology by themselves. That was a fail. It's really, really hard to teach yourself astrology, I found out, because it's so complex, and there are so many ways you can take it. You know, I could have learned Vedic astrology. I could have stuck with the more modern psychological stuff. But for whatever reason, I was drawn to traditional Hellenistic astrology. And I still stand by like the logic of, if you want to understand a subject, why not start at the beginning? And just based on like your YouTube channel, I knew I would like the approach because of all these other things that you kind of tie in, whether it's like James Hillman or the spiritual stuff. Like I wanted that in my astrology practice, basically, at least when I was like learning it. And so starting with like the very beginning, I think it was the second class, which is where you talk about the metaphysics and all of like the philosophy stuff. I mean, that alone is worth taking the whole course for, because I really had that like that other matrix moment where you're like, oh, I knew that there was something to astrology, and you'd already convinced me about it being useful for prediction. Actually seeing this really elegant underlying mechanism for everything, and mechanism sounds like the wrong word, but that was amazing. Like just learning about that, and I kind of don't want to give it away to people, but the stuff that we learned in that lecture was incredible.
That is one of the probably the most popular lectures in the full year program that I teach, because people go, I know there is something rational and beautiful and artistic, but like really intelligent behind this system, but they don't fully know how it works, why it works, what spiritual philosophy it's rooted in. And, you know, so it becomes a mishmash, and then it's really easy to kind of be shy about it, to be like, yeah, I mean, just it's like, you know, tarot cards and tie-dye shirts and posters, and I'm into eclectic stuff. But when you learn what ancient astrologers are really doing and what they thought, and how they viewed the cosmos, and how this language emerged that has this incredible prophetic ability behind it, this predictive ability and psychological components, it really blows you away. I mean, that's why I teach this, because it's captured my heart so fully. And, you know, I find that it's very, very liberating to have that kind of paradigm shift.
Yeah. And we keep coming back to that. Like, it's amazing how everything gets brought in, so like every class, you can expect those moments of like, wow, that's how that works. And yeah, so that's been amazing. The progression as well. This is something that I don't think every teacher is capable of doing quite so masterfully. Like, I've taken a lot of online courses for like different things, and people just want to give you all of their information. But the way you've kind of taken us from having a really, really stable foundation, and then with every subject, like whether it's the planets, the signs, the houses, trying to, again, reinforce this foundation, and then build upon that, which is just really helpful. I mean, I have a terrible memory, so it's been good to like keep going over things, and just in terms of a way to learn something, it's been really helpful. And I couldn't have got that from books or as many like YouTube videos and podcasts I listen to. I know that that's something that you have to take like a kind of progressive course to understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've described it as like scaffolding. It's like you know, the opening lectures there's 30 lectures on the year. They're 2 to 3 hours each, usually like 2.5. It starts with history, starts with philosophy and metaphysics. Then you start building through the houses, signs, planets, aspects, dignities, and this language unfolds. And yet at every stage, what people don't realize about ancient astrology is that the theory, as you learn it, it's as though you suddenly realize that the theory is actually like this beautiful tapestry where the same core patterns are being repeated on every level of the theory. Mm. And the same core reasons philosophically and spiritually are there within the pattern as well. And so it becomes this thing that you're beholding, And then, which we're not there yet in your class, and then you blast off into, meeting with real people and seeing the language put into action and then breaking down those sessions. And most people, if they have the patience to work through, each lesson in the structured way, when you get there, then everything just kind of explodes. It's really amazing.
Yeah, no, and I don't know how many other courses offer so much in terms of that, the client being able to watch like an actual client session. I've spoken to friends and they were like, yeah, we didn't do that on our like massively long course. And our class did get like a taste of one of those sessions, but just seeing that made me realize how valuable this is going to be. And again, it's like, all of them, I can't wait for that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. Well, thank you. That's helpful. It is a class that if people are really looking for guidance, structure, and to build confidence, you really deeply understand, not just memorizing lists of keywords and things like that, but you really deeply understand. See, the thing is in astrology is that if you understand the logic behind the topic list for every house, for every sign, if you understand where all of that's coming from, why it's there in the math and the astronomy, in the spiritual science that ancient mystics embraced, if you understand that, then you have the creative tools to be able to use astrology intuitively. It becomes like a scale that you can improvise on. When I learned modern astrology in the beginning, I had to rely on my own creative, associative, metaphorical thinking with a limited understanding of what I was working with. And I did that for a while. And a lot of people do it and they do it nicely. But once you get into ancient astrology, it is such a game changer, because when you realize where the whole system comes from, it's like, okay, wow, now I have a creative understanding at my disposal that I just can't get from like 99% of modern astrology textbooks. And I had to have teachers to show me that. Like I could never have done that without having several really good teachers of my own.
Well, that's it. And it was something that was really frustrating me about the books that I was reading. And I was just getting sick of just reading about these keywords and not understanding why they meant what they meant, why what appeared to be that the signs and the houses and the planet were basically all variations of the same thing. And it felt too hard. The idea of actually doing a reading for somebody, even though I knew these keywords really well. And you mentioned confidence, like I just didn't feel confident to do that. Whereas this, it's like you have this structure and then you can not necessarily play with it completely, but be more creative with what comes out of that.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people, I'd say probably like at this point, probably 40% of maybe even 50 of the people who take my year one program stick around and take the second year program. And then some percentage also stick around and take my horary astrology class, which is the bull locating method, right? So they're really, for people who really love astrology, there's, the courses I offer. I mean, that's like, I would say there's three things that define my career: making astrological content, doing readings for people, and teaching people how to do astrology. Those are the three things that I do. And the one that occupies the most of my creative energy are my classes. Like I even like people like my YouTube content and, like realize that I probably put 3 or 4 times as much per year into my courses that I put into my YouTube content. So it's a great class, and there's a lot there for people who want to go really deep. Every class comes along with a variety of reading assignments that are all optional, quizzes you can take and test yourself on, discussion group where we're looking at charts sometimes, bonus material, bonus lectures. So and some people just go full out. I mean, they just go full on with it. And other people are just looking for guided, structured way of deepening something that's more of a hobby, but it's built so that you can go as deep as you're looking for. And then some people end up getting certified at the end. There's a test you can take at the end if you're looking to kind of, put something on the resume. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that I am one of those people who's gone like whole hog on the bonus material, and there is so much of it, and it's a lot of it not all of it, but it's stuff that I just can't imagine where I would have found that. And yeah, that's been really, really helpful, especially for me who wants to geek out on all things.
It's helpful to have, like, in any discipline, especially one that is like a basically like a rogue spiritual science today. It's not like there's no schools, there's no um it's really helpful to study with someone where, you know, it's like Ask Jeeves. Do you remember that? So you just go and people throughout the year and in class are always being like, where can I learn more about this, or where do I get more of that, or what's up with this, or what's up with that. And having a teacher who's been around a long time, who's had a lot of good, I've had a lot of good teachers myself, and I'm just more of a veteran in the field. Whether it's me or another person who has that ability, that's the only way to really learn in astrology, because it wasn't for me until I had 3 or 4 teachers enter my life like that, who were just encyclopedic in terms of what they knew, and where they could direct me, that I really started taking off. Because you have to know what's crap and what's real, because there's actually a lot of crap out there, unfortunately, on the internet. And then there's some really good stuff out there too, but you have to know how to parse through it. And another thing that people need help with is, like, people want to develop a coherent, consistent way of doing astrology. And if you're trying to do it on your own, you'll pick up things here or there, but you'll struggle to see how they all fit together. And oftentimes you'll run up against really troubling contradictions. And having a teacher there to help you work those out is also, like, maybe one of the most practical things that people get from the course.
Completely. And yeah, I've already started to see in myself, when I'm watching or listening to content that maybe before taking the course I was very open to. Now I'm like, I don't know, like that's not either fitting in with what I know now. Basically, maybe it stops you from picking up bad habits as well, just having that foundation.
Yeah, there's a lot of people named like Vanessa Stardust just shooting just shooting off about stuff. I'm just kidding, but yeah, there's a lot of that stuff out there, and it's not that I consider myself to have like the answer to everything either. But one thing that I can boast is that I'm a avid student. I've had good teachers, and I don't stop learning. Like I have every single day of the year, I'm writing, seeing clients, teaching, and continuing to study ancient astrology, to read ancient spiritual manuscripts like the Puranas, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the treatises of the Pythagoreans. Like, these are this is a regular place for me. And so you need a teacher who's at least, neck deep in being a student of this stuff. And I think I can at least say that I am that. Anyway, thank you, Kat, for helping me promote the upcoming program. It's really nice of you, and I know you've been getting a lot out of it. So I always like having people on like that who can just, tell a cool story, show like a lot of people who have really diverse interests, really interesting creative paths out there, like yourself, find astrology. So I'm always just happy to try and showcase some of what my students are doing as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited to finish it up and, well, keep going with it.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll end here. If people want to check out my upcoming program, it is at nightlightastrology@gmail.com is my email address. If you have questions, email me. If you want to check out the course, go to nightlightastrology.com and head to the certification course tab. We start on November 16th. Saturdays goes from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. You don't have to be there for every single class. You can take it remotely. That's just fine. People ask me that all the time. There is an early bird discount that is in effect until November 1st. You have about, I guess, a little over a week to still take advantage of that. There's a full tuition and 12-month payment plan if you need something stretched out. And there's also need-based tuition options for people who are hurting financially, and a list of qualifying factors you can take a look at on the certification course tab if that might be you. I try to make the course super accessible for people regardless of what the budget is. I've always been of the belief that astrology is a spiritual science that needs to be accessible to everybody, because it's a language of liberation and healing at its core. So if you're feeling like I want to take it, but you're having some hindrance financially, just take a look at the qualifications for need-based tuition that I offer on the website. I think that's it for today. So we'll end here. Thanks again, Kat, for joining me today. It was been really fun talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. And one more thing, find Kat at thecreativeintrovert.com. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.